The conflict between Israel and Hamas intensified today as the Israeli military took out what they said were Hamas strongholds in Gaza, and reporters got a close-up look at some of the atrocities carried out by the terrorists. At least 1,800 people have now been killed since the start of this war. Israeli officials say they've hit hundreds of targets in Gaza. And President Biden confirmed a short time ago that 14 Americans have died. U.S. citizens are also among some of the hostages taken by Hamas. CBS News foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tyab joins us now from Tel Aviv in Israel. Imtiaz, tell us what the situation is on the ground and how it has changed in the past 24 hours.
Nancy, you're absolutely right. It's an extremely tense situation on the ground, but of course, most acutely at Israel's southern border, where there's been a massive buildup of Israeli forces over the past 24 hours or so. We understand that 30-plus military battalions have been massing along that perimeter fence with Gaza, that very same fence which was breached in 6 separate locations early on Saturday, resulting in that horrifying assault we saw in which so many people have been killed. As you rightly point out, journalists have been slowly being given access to some of these areas where, frankly, horrific things took place, massacres, frankly, and all of that really just underscores the fact that the situation here is not only extremely tense, but many people are very concerned about what could come next. Nancy.
Imtiaz, what is it that the Israeli military believes it can achieve by going in with ground forces that it can't achieve firing missiles by air? I mean, they've said they've already fired hundreds of them. What do they think they can do if they go in with ground troops?
Nancy, you make a really good point. Over the past 24 hours alone, Israel has dropped 500 or so, or rather carried out 500 or so airstrikes inside Gaza. It is an extraordinary number. And when you look at the images coming outside Gaza, which has been bombarded so many times in the past, the devastation is astonishing. But the reality is that Israel understands that this situation is different. This is not like the 4 major conflicts that Israel and Hamas have fought over the last 16 years. This is unlike anything Israel has ever experienced. And more importantly, it is unlike anything Hamas has ever been able to achieve inside of Israel, for lack of a better phrase. And I think the reality is that Israel's trying to understand what to do next, and that is why we haven't seen that ground invasion start just yet. The reality is that when you look at the Israeli military, when you look at the Israeli intelligence, and frankly, you look at the failure in which led to the fact that they weren't able to stop this from happening or even know that an attack was in the offing, I think they are going to be very careful about what they do next. Nancy.
And Imtiaz, I imagine that one of the things that must give them pause is the knowledge that Hamas is holding dozens of hostages, and we've learned some of those hostages are Americans. How does that affect the Israeli military strategy here?
It changes everything. Again, we are in uncharted territory here. The fact that there are dozens, perhaps even over 100 people inside Gaza being held by Hamas, and what we understand scattered to 4 corners of the Palestinian territory, which is about twice the size of Washington, D.C., it is going to be extremely difficult for Israeli forces to go in and to try to rescue these people, let alone know where exactly they're being held. We have to remember that, as well as this heavily built up territory in which we see these images of, underneath all of that is a vast network of tunnels, and many believe that a lot of these people are being held in those tunnels. And so in the Israeli calculus, as they try to figure out what to do when they enter Gaza, and it does seem like they will enter the Gaza Strip on some sort of ground invasion, the question then becomes, what's it going to look like? Are they going to reoccupy the Gaza Strip, much in the way they did up until 2005? Will we see Israeli tanks on every street corner? Will we see Israeli soldiers on every street of Gaza? Those are questions we simply don't have an answer for, and it's something that the Israeli military is clearly still trying to work out for themselves. Nancy.
And Hamas has made a variety of threats when it comes to those hostages. Imtiaz Tyab in Tel Aviv, thanks so much. Stay safe. In a speech at the White House today, President Biden called the Hamas attacks on Israel, quote, sheer evil. He said the U.S. will make sure Israel has what it needs to defend itself. The president also spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu earlier today about the situation. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us now with more on all of that. Ed, President Biden was really forceful in his condemnation of Hamas. Let's take a listen to some of his remarks.
There are moments in this life, and I mean this literally, when the pure, unadulterated evil is unleashed on this world. The people of Israel lived through one such moment this weekend. The bloody hands of the terrorist organization Hamas, a group whose stated purpose for being is to kill Jews.
Brutally critical of Hamas. Ed, what did we learn about the U.S. response?
Well, he was unequivocal in stating that the United States will provide whatever assistance is needed by Israel. Notably, however, later U.S. officials made clear that that doesn't involve necessarily, at least for now, sending U.S. military forces into the conflict. Instead, much of the focus is going to be on deploying experts from the U.S. government, either in the military or other agencies that can help the Israelis extract the untold number of hostages that are still being held by Hamas. That is a top priority of this administration, which, of course, has had so many high-profile hostage negotiations in the last 2.5 years or so. But it remains a big concern here at the White House as they try to work through exactly how many Americans may be being held by Hamas, where, and what might be done by the Israelis to get them out. But it was also clear that, at least for now, there are no plans for, say, U.S. Special Forces or some other entity to go in and provide the physical extraction of those people when it's time to do so, which you know, we'll see if that holds. The other thing to keep in mind, there's now a U.S. carrier strike group in the Mediterranean close enough to this conflict that it's going to get noticed. It includes the USS Gerald Ford, which is now the most advanced aircraft carrier in the U.S. fleet. We've been told that this essentially is not a place for troops to launch from, but could be a spot from which, you know, groups that could help extract hostages deploys from potentially and then brings them back. The other thing the president and the White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan signaled is it wasn't deployed to the region in response to Hamas so much as a deterrent to others, specifically Iran or Syria, Hezbollah, to get involved, and a real push to make sure that they don't and thus widen the conflict.
Right, the president said in his speech, don't try it. You know, at the White House briefing, Ed, you asked the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, a question that a lot of people have been wondering about, how much Israel and the U.S. knew before this attack. What did he have to say?
Well, why don't we just take a look? Was there anything in what crosses your desk that would suggest that this was coming?
We did not see anything that suggested an attack of this type was going to unfold any more than the Israelis did.
So we at first asked, did the Israelis know anything about this? He says you got to ask them why they didn't. The U.S. did not either. This will inevitably become a question for lawmakers on the various committees, those of us in our line of work, to figure out why isn't it that this was on their radar screens, if at all. And part of the reason why it's worth asking Jake Sullivan is because just 10 days ago or so at the Atlantic Festival, which was co-hosted by CBS, he made clear that he had probably spent less time worrying about conflict in the Middle East than any of his most recent predecessors, that it was a quieter region in recent years, despite the concerns about Iran and the ongoing concerns with Saudi Arabia and the war in Yemen, that there just wasn't as much going on in that part of the world that merited White House attention. Now, of course, that has completely changed, and we'll see in the coming days how the White House explains exactly why intelligence agencies didn't pick up on it.
Ed, you also asked about the president's divided focus over the past couple of days, because we know he was interviewed by the special counsel in the case involving his classified documents both on Sunday and on Monday. What did you learn about the timing of that interview?
Not much more, Nancy. They insist that this was something that had been scheduled long in advance, but there's questions about Why was Robert Hur, the special counsel, here to interview the president on Sunday and Monday? Was that part of the agreement? Did Sunday's interview have to get postponed in part because of the response to what was going on in the Middle East, so they asked him to come back on Monday? Karine Jean-Pierre, the press secretary, and frankly, the spokesperson for the White House counsel's team have not said why perhaps the president didn't ask for it to be rescheduled. This is in keeping with the current White House policy of not discussing the details of this ongoing investigation and being as tight-lipped as possible to at least publicly demonstrate that they're being cooperative with prosecutors as their investigation continues.
White House working very hard to make sure we know that the president had lots of calls and meetings that did not involve the special counsel on both days. Ed O'Keefe, thank you so much.
Take care.